All right, well, hello again, GVC peeps. Today we're going to be looking at the last two of the 10 Commandments together. So why don't we refresh ourselves by going to Exodus 20, verses 16 and 17, and reading those commandments as they appear in the Bible. All right? Exodus 20, verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. In verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, so no false witness and no coveting. Okay, the 9th and the 10th commandments. And now for our question and answer this week, we'll read that together as well. Question: what does God require in the 9th and 10th commandments? Answer: 9th, that we do not lie or deceive, but speak the truth in love. And 10th, that we are content, not envying anyone or resenting what God has given them or us. All right. So the Catechism says that we're required by the 9th commandment not to lie or to deceive, but to speak the truth of love, in love rather, instead. But this sounds a lot different than what the Bible said, right? The Bible said you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So what's going on here? In order to fully understand the spirit of this command, we actually have to take a little trip back to ancient Israel. Because you see, Israel was a theocracy, which means that they weren't a nation with a secular government like we are. For them, all of life was governed by the laws of God, and the spiritual leaders, or the elders, were responsible for enforcing those laws. And what would happen is that if you or I knew someone was breaking one of God's laws or one of the commandments, we had a responsibility to bring that person to the elders and to make a formal witness statement. But the elders, they would never convict a person based on just one witness's testimony alone, because it was too possible that the person just had a grudge against the other person, and they wanted to make them feel the pain, right? They wanted to take them down. And so what would happen is you would have to gather witnesses who also saw what you saw, and they would have to give their testimony with you. And only under the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses would the elders actually convict someone and sentence them for their crime. Now, unfortunately, when God gives the 10 Commandments, He knows how wicked humans can be, and He knew that people would eventually find a way to use this system for injustice. And so God gives this command that we shall not give false witness. When Jesus was put on trial, people were paid to come forward and to lie, to bear false witness at His trial, so that Jesus would be sentenced to death wrongfully for a crime He didn't commit. It was a terrible thing to do. And the same thing happens to a man named Naboth in 1 Kings, which I'm going to be preaching on in a few weeks, so stay tuned. But Ahab, the wicked king, wants this vineyard that Naboth owns, and Naboth won't give it to him, so his very mean wife, Jezebel, hires a bunch of people to come and bring false witness against Naboth, and then Naboth ends up getting stoned to death wrongfully, and then Ahab steals his vineyard. That's what it means to bear false witness. All right. So the ninth commandment is meant. The spirit of the 9th commandment is meant to protect the innocent from being falsely accused, which sometimes led to their death. Right? Now the Catechism takes this principle and expands it to include everything else that the Bible has to say about telling the truth and how our words affect others. Right? And so you and I, we might not drag our neighbor off to court and try to get them executed or thrown in jail, but have you ever stretched the truth to your parents about something that one of your siblings maybe did in order to get them in trouble? Or have you ever minimized the ugly truth about yourself and something you did in order to get out of trouble? Right? Both of those cases would be examples of breaking the 9th commandment. So is gossiping, which actually involves often telling the truth but doing so in such a way to cast another person in a bad light or to damage their reputation. That too is breaking the 9th commandment. Jesus said that to fulfill the 10 commandments, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, right? He also said at one point that as you wish that others would do to you, do to them, right? Do unto others as you have them do unto you. That's more of the famous way of putting it. But the fact is, it hurts when people tell lies about us, even if it doesn't cost us majorly or have very serious, long-lasting consequences for us. It still hurts. So why would we do that to someone else, right? If we treat others the way we want to be treated, we would not bear false witness against them. We're called to build one another up with our words. And so that's what it means to obey the 9th commandment. All right? Okay, last one, 10th commandment, you shall not covet. And this is kind of like a master commandment, all right? If you were somehow to have read all of the other 9 commandments up to this point and still think that you're doing okay, this one will get you. Because coveting is behind most of the other things that are expressly condemned, especially in the later commandments. As we're going to see, to covet is to be consumed with desire for something that belongs to someone else, or at least that doesn't belong to you. All right? And it could be someone else's things, it could be their wife, it could be their family, or their success, or their happiness. The truth is, it doesn't matter what it is. The point is that you want it and you don't have it. And therefore, you feel that God has somehow been unfair to you in not giving it to you. This is where murder and adultery and theft and bearing false witness begin, right? Remember last week we talked about how all of those things actually begin in the heart, right? That's coveting. That's what it means. Let's say that your brother or your sister is playing with something that you really want to be playing with, and you walk over to them and you hit them and you take the toy that they're playing with. Now, sure, you've hit them and you've stolen from them, and those are both terrible things, but your first sin was actually coveting. The first sin was in your heart, right? You couldn't stand the thought of seeing them enjoy something that you wanted to be enjoying. And so you acted on that coveting and you hit them and you stole from them, right? Now, the cure to coveting is something that's called contentment. All right, and the Apostle Paul talks a lot about contentment in his letter to the Philippians. And contentment, just to define it, is a state or an attitude of satisfaction and gratitude with and for all that you have. All right, so Philippians 4, this is the Apostle Paul. He says, "For I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." See, contentment isn't an emotional state like happiness. It's impossible to be happy when things aren't going your way because happiness is just an emotional response. It's kind of instinctive. It's what's going on in response to our circumstances, right? But it is possible to be content even when things aren't going our way because it's a trained state of mind. And the Apostle Paul says that he's learned this secret, that whether he had everything he needed or nothing at all, he could be content. He could be satisfied and grateful because he could do all things through him who strengthened him, right? Paul knew that Jesus had given up everything so that Paul and you and I could have everything, okay? If our thinking is oriented around that central and beautiful truth of the gospel, then we will be satisfied and grateful for all that we have in this life, whether it is much or it is little. All right? And that is what the 10th commandment requires of us. All right, that brings us to the end of our discussions about the actual individual 10 commandments. I think we have a couple more questions that kind of center around the law or the 10 commandments and how they function. But we'll get to those in the coming weeks. That's it for today. Thanks, guys.